The Butterfly Effect by Nikayla Sarai. Chapter 12. What's up, Duck? Roman had jumped into a frozen lake once on a dare. He thought he'd never experience anything colder than that. He was wrong. The invisible hand that clamped down on his shoulder and abruptly pulled him away from Patton and into the time stream left him feeling like he'd been doused with dry ice, dialed down to absolute frozen, and then shoved beyond that point into the Marianas Trench of freezing cold. The swirling rainbow vortex abruptly vanished, and Roman stumbled, ramming his knees in the drawers of his vanity, barely managing to grab the sides of the desk to steady himself as he hunched over it, lungs screaming for air as he raggedly inhaled like he'd just risen from the depths of the ocean. "Don't move. Your body will need a moment to adjust to being in the altered timeline," the genie said, his hand now warm on Roman's shoulder. "Experiencing dizziness, muscle weakness, nausea, or any other ill effect is normal and will pass momentarily." "Oh, goody." Roman grimaced, knuckles going white on the wood as he hunched his shoulders, his vision swimming so that there were a good half-dozen genies visible in the mirror. He lowered his head, working on clearing his sight and getting warm air back into his frozen lungs. Should have mentioned that before you brought me back, Sparkles," he muttered, blinking his eyes clear as he took a deep breath, forcing himself to straighten and look at the genie's reflection. "Warn a dude before you suddenly jerk him back into the present." At least the genie had been right, though. As cold as he'd been seconds ago, he now felt perfectly normal. The genie raised an eyebrow, pulling his glimmering hand away. "With your impulsive nature, I couldn't." His impulsive... Roman whirled, spreading out his hands. "Impulsive? If I had just stood there listening to you yakking, then nothing would have changed." Roman paused, taking in the room around him for the first time since he got back. It looked exactly the same. Broken furniture and shattered vases, his back twinging from his scuffle with Logan. Roman dropped his hands, throat tightening. "Nothing changed," he whispered. The genie exhaled and nodded, a crease forming between his eyes as he studied the air around him. "Which is why I told you, Roman. You can't change others' choices, only choices you've made." But his heart sunk. How had he messed it up? Finally a chance to stop Patton, and it had done nothing? The genie shook his head. "The watch should have prevented you from doing this," he muttered, frowning at Roman's chest where the pocket watch rested on its chain. "The lifelines always change before I can pull my warps out of the past, but yours didn't." Roman growled. Great. He'd broken the watch. How could he have done that? He barely touched it. He'd followed the rules. He moved, avoiding the broken glass as he paced around the genie like a caged tiger. "I did only change my choice. Which, by the way, you also didn't tell me how difficult it is to go off script, because that was bloody difficult. But he gestured to himself, chose to chase after Patton instead of just letting him leave. I gave him another option and he took it. Thankfully. Hopefully. Had Pat still gotten into the accident even after helping him search for the umbrella? He racked his memories, searching for the answer. He'd remember if they found it, yes? No? He kicked at the shards of glass, touching the crown pendant. He wasn't remembering anything different. Would he never remember a different history, even if he did change the past? That was idiotic if he didn't. But if nothing had... The genie could only pull him out if the lifelines had changed. But his hadn't... Wait. He whirled, pointing at the genie. "You said lifelines." He raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" "And mine didn't change." He nodded. "So..." Roman licked his lips. "Did Patton's?" The genie hesitated, the rainbow along his skin swirling with blue the same shade as Patton's eyes. Roman lifted his head, his heart leaping in his chest. "It did!" He grinned, pointing at the genie. "That's how you pulled me out! His lifeline changed!" The genie broke eye contact, frowning back down at the watch. It shouldn't be possible. Shouldn't be didn't mean it couldn't be possible. It just meant unlikely. But it did! What changed in his life? What happened to... Roman cut off as a quadruple rap sounded on the door at the same moment his cell phone buzzed. He jerked, staring at the door. He knew that rap. But he couldn't... How could he know it? No one in the theater knocked like that. "Who's that?" he asked. The genie glanced over his shoulder, his eyes growing sharp. "Your consequence," he said simply, his hair moving in an unseen breeze as he shimmered, disappearing from view. Where are you going?" Roman cut off as the door swung open, revealing a man standing in the doorway, his curly hair dyed in shades of pastel blue and pink, his bright blue eyes shining behind a pair of glasses. Not sunglasses, Roman's mind supplied, as the man flashed him an all-too-familiar 100-watt smile, adjusting his frames as he tisked, taking in the room and Roman's appearance. "Geez, Princey, am I going to have to patch you up every time I try to drop in for a surprise visit?" Roman barely stopped himself from gaping at the visitor, his mind straining for information that was just out of reach. He knew this man. It couldn't... Was it? "Pat?" he whispered. No way. This tall, confident figure couldn't be... His heart leapt into his throat. Patton grinned wider, bright blue eyes sparkling behind his glasses. "What? You expected me not to show up for my best friend's last big hurrah before he flies to London?" he asked, crossing the room in 2 long strides, pulling Roman into a tight hug. "Fat chance, Ro. Just because my residency is trying to suck away all my free time doesn't mean it's going to stop me from being there for you." He inhaled sharply, an instant ache forming behind his eyes as images and conversations of the past shot into his head like a geyser into a water bottle. He buried his head against Patton's shoulder to keep from crying out as he clung to his best friend. Ow! Another thing the genie neglected to tell him. Holding 2 sets of memories in your head hurt. Yet, the memories told him, this was Patton. This was Patton! Roman laughed, blinking the tears from his eyes as he pulled back, taking in his best friend. "Geez, man, you can't call me out for being surprised." Even if he technically had memories of when Patton first got glasses in his 2nd year of college, and when he'd passed Roman in height in the senior year of high school, it still felt like he was seeing him for the first time. Because he was. At least, the first time with dyed hair. Roman raised an eyebrow. "With the hair and all?" He gestured up and down as knowledge and memories settled in his head alongside the original set. "I barely recognized you." Patton chuckled. "You like?" he asked, running a hand through the pastel colors. "The other doctors disapprove, but the kids love it, so I've kept it." Roman clicked his tongue. Well, if it's for the kids." He leaned against the vanity, careful not to jar his aching back, unable to stop staring at his best friend. "You always did try to make their day." It used to be with balloon animals and silly jokes, though. But now that he was a doctor... Roman stopped breathing for a second. A doctor? Patton had become a doctor? But the new set of memories didn't lie. He'd been to the graduation, held the certificate in his hand that made Patton official. It was crazy. Patton had talked of becoming a teacher throughout high school. Not that he'd ever fulfilled that dream after the accident. Pat laughed. "What can I say?" He spread his arms. "I like kids. I do what I can to make them smile. But look at me," he tisked, clapping his hands together. "Getting distracted when you're hurt." He grabbed Roman's hand, pulling him away from the vanity. "Let me see." "How did you... know?" Patton pointed to the lounging chair. "Yeah." "Remove the shirt and lie down first," he said, removing his glasses and sticking them in his shirt pocket. This was weird. He remembered Patton treating him before, yet it didn't make him feel any less self-conscious pulling his shirt off, wincing as the fabric caught on the glass and thorns stuck in his skin. "I can listen and move at the same time," he grumbled, tossing the shirt over the back of the couch, fighting down the flutter in his stomach. From what he could remember, Patton had patched him up dozens of times. He shouldn't be nervous. "Aha, you keep telling yourself that. Lay down already, Princey," Patton said, grabbing the first aid kit. "I'm curious if you're better or worse off than your coffee boy." "Logan." Roman frowned, pulling a pillow to his chest to hug as he laid down on his stomach. Had his life changed at all? It didn't seem like it. They'd still had their fight. Both of them were still injured. He exhaled. This changing the past thing was a pain. "I probably got the worst of it. When did you run into him?" He didn't remember Pat meeting Logan before, though Roman had complained about him enough. His best friend had practically been living in the hospital the past year due to his residency, and Roman had been too busy on Broadway and preparing for the trip to London to go visit. "I ran into him and your TD, Reese, on the way to see you," Patton said, pulling the vanity chair over to the couch. "I saw the bandage on his hand and the blood spotting it and inquired after it." He smiled, bright blue eyes sparkling with approval. "You did a good job bandaging it, Ro. I'm glad to see you paid attention back when I practiced on you for my tests." His warm fingers ghosted over Roman's back as he leaned over, his eyes darting back and forth as he took up the tweezers and cleansed them with an antiseptic swab. Roman shrugged. He'd originally learned it on his own, but the new memories were showing him Patton's version too. "You're a good teacher, Pat. You could have gone that route too, you know." "Yeah," Patton tilted his head at the familiar argument. "Being a doctor is, well, more rewarding, though. To see a sick child become well again." He shrugged, bending over him, tweezers at the ready. "He's quite the handful, by the way. Logan. I can see why we hadn't met yet." "Huh." Roman winced as the first glass shard came free from his back. That was an understatement. Roman let out a shaky breath, working to stay relaxed as he twisted his head to keep his friend in view. "Please tell me he didn't try to punch you." That's his usual greeting to unexpected company. He'd been working to break low of the habit, but with his coffee boy's current mind state, it wouldn't surprise him if Logan thought Patton was from the police. He flinched as Patton pulled a thorn from his back. No punching," Patton said slowly, focusing on Roman's back. "I saw the intent in his eyes, though. There's a lot of anger there. He refused to let me within 2 feet of him until Reese said I was a friend of yours, and I told him I was a doctor." Patton shook his head. "I had to show him my hospital ID before he consented. He didn't believe I could be a doctor with my multicolored hair. Thought it wasn't professional. He kept mentioning some dude named Morgan was supposed to look at him." "He's the master stitcher," Roman hissed sharply, back arching away from the tweezers. Pat shot him an apologetic smile. "Sorry. It's fine." Roman slowly exhaled, trying to relax. "Reese was taking Logan to see him." Patton rolled his eyes. "Heaven help me, Roman. A doctor, a nurse, even an EMT, not some master stitcher. If I hadn't... Why would you... Oh, he could recall the lectures Patton had given him on the subject the first couple times he'd tried to treat his own wounds without seeking help. Logan's... difficult? Glass shards dropped onto the lid of the first aid kit. Too difficult to go to the hospital? Too difficult to be willing to risk those wounds getting infected? Too difficult that he'd prefer getting stuck with a needle by a man used to working with fabric instead of skin? His eyes glittered as he glanced to Roman. He met Patton's eyes, unblinking. Yes. Today, yes. Pat raised an eyebrow. Just today? It's unlucky for him. He briefly looked upwards, popping his lips in exasperation. Of course it is. Roman hummed, watching his friend. He didn't think he'd ever tire of it. Patton looked so at ease, sitting there, wielding the tweezers with an expertise that spoke of years of practice, his eyes intent on his work. I'm surprised he made it to the theater, actually. He's On edge. On edge, Patton repeated thoughtfully, before nodding in agreement. Yeah, I can see that. More thorns clinked onto the lid. Only got him to relax when I started talking about work. Roman raised an eyebrow. And? Patton flashed him a smile, eyes twinkling. Kid has some interesting theories on bioorganics I hadn't considered to help increase the healing rate after invasive surgery. If he'll let me, I'd love to pick his brain a bit more. You never told me he was majoring in biochem, Ro. Roman snorted. Biochem? Logan really was another Bruce Banner. I didn't know, actually. He's rather tight-lipped about his past. For good reason. Ah, Patton nodded. I get that. I sensed he was just waiting to ask me about the tattoos. Poor guy. The logic one has a particular darkness to it. I don't think he likes it. Roman grimaced, the guilt settling heavily in his stomach like a cannonball. For a good reason, he said, keeping his voice low. It was forced on him. Patton paused, pursing his lips, eyes going dark. Is that so? He glanced to the doorway and the figure lurking there. You didn't want it? Roman lifted his head, heart jumping into his throat as Logan warily stepped into the room, clad in just a towel. His long hair dripped as it hung damp around his face, covering the tattoo in question. No. He bit off the word, glancing between Roman and Patton as he slowly crossed one arm over his skinny chest, hiding the star symbol on his sternum. My clothes. Give them. A please would do wonders, but no. Patton shook his head, turning back to Roman. They're filthy, and I just got you clean. Logan growled, his eyes flashing as a knife appeared in his hand. Give them back. Honestly, Roman exhaled, pushing up onto his elbows. Logan, I thought we talked about the knives. He shouldn't be surprised to see the weapon, though he'd love to know how his coffee boy had made the knife appear when he was literally wearing nothing but a towel. Patton's not a threat. He bared his teeth, eyes flashing as a rumble emanated from his chest. My clothes aren't here. Pat flicked his eyes to Logan as he pushed Roman back down. I'm not done, he murmured, pulling out another sliver of glass. Morgan took them to repair them. I know you keep a few spares around, Ro. You can let the kiddo here borrow a set for now, right? Kid? And there he went. Roman surged to his feet, but Pat beat him to the punch, reaching Logan first, plucking the knife from his fingers as the coffee boy recoiled from his sudden proximity. He slammed back into the wall and bit down a yelp, face twisting in pain. Patton winced, taking a step back. Sorry, Logan, he apologized, closing the switchblade before holding it out to the coffee boy like a peace offering. I didn't mean that as an insult. Most of my patients are children, and I often use kiddo when I refer to them. It slips out on occasion when I talk to adults, too. He wiggled the blade in his fingers. Like just now. I'm sorry. Forgive me? Logan drew in a shaky breath, lowering his head, his damp hair falling in front of his face. Keep the knife, he muttered. I'm not supposed to have it. Roman relaxed, silently breathing a sigh of relief as he moved to the closet to grab a spare change of clothes. That was probably the closest Patton would get to Logan accepting his apology. Pat cocked his head, his fingers closing around the handle. You're sure? Logan clenched his hands. No. Well, Patton clicked his tongue, slipping the blade into his pocket. When you want it back, just let me know, okay? He held out his hand again to the coffee boy. I know I'm past your 12-minute mark, but can I finish treating your injuries before you get dressed? We can stay in here while Princey takes his own shower. Logan's eyes flashed as he turned his head to Roman. Princey? A nickname from high school, Roman said with a half shrug, holding out the clothes. These might be a bit loose on you, but they should do until Morgan returns. It was from junior high, actually. Patton smirked and dropped his hand, his eyes glinting with mischief. After you spent the semester in that prince costume to get into character for... Don't you dare! Roman clamped a hand over Patton's mouth, hoping his face wasn't as red as it felt. Don't scar my coffee boy's tender ears, Padre. He doesn't need to hear more than that." "Oh no," Logan deadpanned, holding the shirt and pants loosely in his arms. "Not my tender ears." He rolled his eyes. "That's a new one. Princey." The nickname sounded so foreign coming from Logan's mouth. Patton had been the only one to still call him that over the years. Logan shook his head, glancing to Patton, then to the door. "I'm sure I've heard worse stories in prison, and will hear more creative ones in—" He hesitated, licking his lips. "In London?" "Yes to London, but no to the story. You won't hear this one. Ever," Roman said, glaring at his friend. It was one thing to have Patton call him that when no one else remembered the origin of the nickname. He wouldn't have Logan knowing the true reason. Pat reached up, pulling Roman's hand down. "I'll tell it to you as soon as he's out of earshot," he promised. Roman gasped, going for as dramatic as possible. "Traitor!" He laughed, ducking out and away from Roman, returning to his chair in the first aid kit. "What? It's only a fair trade, Princey. A story for a treatment. I think it's a deal." Logan frowned, cautiously pushing away from the door, a flash of pain crossing his face as he jarred his back. "Is he always like this?" Patton tilted his head, widening his eyes as he too glanced to Roman. "Like what?" Roman nodded, moving for the door. A shower sounded like a good idea, and Patton could handle Logan for a few more minutes. "You'll get used to it, Lo. But he's harmless as long as you don't force him to go dad mode on you." "Dad mode?" "Behave. Let him treat you, follow his instructions, and you won't find out." Patton tisked, giving Roman a brief pout. "Like I do that to him when we've just met." "That's exactly why I'm warning him. You've just met," he retorted, grabbing the handle. Patton scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Now you're going to make him fear it, Princey. It's not a bad mode to have, you know." He ducked his head, pulling out bandages and more antiseptic wipes from the kit. "Logan, mind if you sit here?" he asked, patting the lounging couch as Roman pulled open the door. "Once you're fixed up, you can put on those clothes. We can even talk about some options for tattoo removal if you want." Logan froze, one hand reaching up to his face before he jerked it back down to the clothes, adjusting them so they covered the star tattoo on his chest. "Like I have the money, Doc," he said, reluctantly moving to the couch, hunching his shoulders. "That's not an issue." Are you mental? Any treatment costs—" "I know, but I also know many doctors around the country, Logan, who specialize in treating skin abrasions. Tattoos included," Patton interrupted, gesturing for the coffee boy to sit on the couch. "If you were forced to get that, or any of your other marks against your will," he said, pointing a finger at Logan's face as he sat before dropping his hand to gesture to the rest of his thin body, "I will see to it that they are properly removed. You have my word on that. There are programs in place to help people in situations similar to yours. Money won't be an issue." The clothes fell to the ground. "You're serious?" Logan breathed, a glimmer of cautionary hope in his eyes. He looked up to Roman. "I'm dreaming. He's serious?" "And welcome to dad mode," Roman said, fighting to sound normal over the lump in his throat. What would he do without Pat in his life? How would he survive the first time around without his best friend here? It was beyond belief how much could change just from Pat choosing to become a doctor. "Told you it wasn't bad," Patton said with a chuckle. The look he shot Roman was more of the mom glare variety, though. "Go shower, Princey," he said, shooing him away. "I got this." "That you do," Roman whispered, giving Logan an encouraging smile as he slipped outside, shutting the door behind him and leaned against it. This was... A tug on his heart pulled him away from the door, and the hallway, still littered with the broken glass and flower petals, vanished as the rainbow time stream reappeared around him in all its swirling glory. The genie shimmered into view, eyes golden and warm. "So? Are you satisfied with your Roman pulled the genie into a hug before he could finish. Was he satisfied? Was he satisfied? Roman laughed through the tears that threatened to fall. This was beyond anything he could have imagined, and it was worth it. So worth